He has had exposure to banking, technology, telecommunications, mining, and manufacturing. And through JCI, he has managed nonprofit projects internationally. That experience has allowed him exposure to corporate and government engagement. He sat on the local Chamber of Commerce for 2 years, which solidified him as a business advocate. He holds a Bachelor of Science in Human Resource from Middle State University and a Master's in Business Administration from the Nottingham Trent University. Mr. Mwale, over to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Precious. Apologies for doing that to you. That was not the intention. I just want to. No problem. I just want to say thank you to Uno for the kind invite. There's a little bit of a backstory about me appearing today. I think when we spoke, Uno and I did say to him, this is the weekend I'll be traveling home. And he says, where is home? And I say, well, it depends. As far as I'm concerned, home is where the job is. And my job is in the UK. So I literally walked in. If I were to point my camera to the floor, you would see my suitcases open. I've been flying from South Africa for the last 2 weeks. I thought flying is a few hours, but in COVID, it's a few weeks. And I think it's what, five flights or 4 flights later, I'm here. So I'm exhausted. If I appear to be talking a lot of nonsense, just forgive me for that. It's probably exhaustion. As a result, between Uno and I, there are probably 4 or 5 topics that I agreed to speak on today. So if I happen to be speaking off topic, just understand I'm speaking to another topic that is not on your program. I never speak off topic. So just take heart in that. I just want to start very quickly to talk about. I think it'll be important to tell a story about the career that I've had. I just turned 40 a couple of weeks ago, and sometimes, when I look at myself in the mirror, I can't tell I'm 40. I don't feel 40. So I constantly have to go back to the things that have happened in my life for me to remember that it's been a long time. And just to put things into perspective for some of you that are on the line, I went to grade 1 in 1987. Based on the brief scroll I did on the video participants, I think it's fair to say a lot of you were ideas at the time. When I was learning to read and write. So put that in perspective. I think second thing that I like to point out to many people is that I finished high school before this millennium. So I was out of school before 2000 came. So I finished in 1999. So I'm ancient. Trust me, I'm pretty ancient. So the things that I'm going to say, take them with a pinch of salt, because some of us ancient people like to gloss over the troubles that we've passed through. But I think it would be good also to point out that I think I'm one of those people that have lived through no cell phone. We were born at a time when, I think in my teenage years, you had to agree on a date by phone when the parents were home. When the parents were not home, they were at work. And that had to be done by agreeing where to meet, and then hoping faithfully that somebody would actually keep their word and turn up where it was agreed you would meet. So you would stand at a corner of a street somewhere looking very clever and waiting for somebody to turn up simply because they said they would last Saturday when you met. So we were born in the days of promise. You could promise something and you knew it was going to happen. So a couple of things just to put things in perspective for you about the way that I see the world. And you'll see that coming through as I speak. I just want to start very, very quickly with a theme that I'm going to call strategy by formation, not by design. So my career started like that. It simply formed. It was not necessarily designed. I finished school with my colleagues and looked for a job with my colleagues and found a job with my colleagues. And so it started. So you simply did things because it was time to do them. My career started the way I joke to my friends often, and I say, my career started the way I have lunch. I have lunch because it's lunchtime. I rarely ever have lunch because I'm hungry. And it's very dangerous for you to do careers like that, to let your career grow by formation and not by design. And I'll discuss that briefly. But just after I finished school in the year 2000, I took up my first ever job, which was a data capture clerk. So my job was to take these large forms, which had been provided by people in the mine, and to put them onto a system on it. And simply type in the numbers of whatever ore they had, whatever production numbers they had. And that was my simple job. And for that, I was paid handsomely. For a 19-year-old, I think I was doing fairly well. I then left that job because it was a short contract, left that job and became a teacher in 2 schools, one of them, Dadai High School. And I have met a lot of my ex-students in the time. I taught literature and English. And I'll go back to why I pointed out that it was literature and English a little bit later. At the time, I was very convinced I understood English, and I was very convinced that it was a skill. As you now can hear from my tone of voice, it is not a skill. And I'll explain again why I think it is not a skill. But I call that period of time my sort of exploration, because thereafter I went to university to study initially a Bachelor of English and Communication. And then I transferred from that degree to a Bachelor of Science in HR. And again, there was a little bit of a story. I had stopped waiting for things to happen. So the only thing that happens automatically now in my life is my age. It just turns automatically, but nothing else goes automatically. So I remember having a conversation with my mother, who at the time thought, my firstborn son has A levels. Surely he must now just look for a job in the mine and work very hard and get a house. Because in the mines, typically with a job with A levels, you'll get a job that would possibly give you a very good salary, and you got a house, and it was a moment of pride for parents. But I refused that, because I was starting to form in my head this idea that there's no such thing as a free house. So I like to say that my career was formed partly by the exposure that I had as a child, watching my mother, who was a secretary at the time, for the CEO of the mine that we lived on, watching my mother work with this man and watching this man run the mine. I was probably between 6 and 9 years old, and he used to let me sit in the office while he took calls. And my pastime was to go home and pretend to be him with a fake phone and start giving orders and things like that. So I thought I understood corporate, and I think my love for corporate started at that point in my life. Now, when I finished my university in 2005, I think I was one of those lucky few people that finished my exam on a Friday and was working on Monday. In a country that everybody knew had hyperinflation and companies were closing every day. That was not because I was clever. That was because over the years, from the time that I was probably 6 to 9 to the time that I was 23 or 24 when I finished it was very clear to me that you don't get a job because you put in an application. You get a job because people know you can do the job. And they don't know you can do the job unless they know you. And they don't know you simply because you played golf with them or because you drank with them. They might know you for that, but they may not have the confidence to give you a job. But they must know you enough professionally that they feel they can give you a job. So one of the things that I did very quickly in university is I was one of those people that started what was called the Human Resource Management Society. And our job was simple. We contacted directors of companies, HR directors of companies, we invited them to university, and we asked them to speak on several topics. To do that, we had to make several phone calls, discuss things with them, brief them for the topics, create some kind of professional relationship. And it is one of those professional relationships that landed me my first job because I was prepared. And I remember that the reason he was so intrigued about my preparation is because when we went to meet him for the briefing session, I had carried with me a file which I had cut articles of his company over the years. So on every Thursday, those of you who know Zimbabwe will know that every Thursday there's a paper. It's called the Financial Gazette. It's pink. It used to come out. I hope it still comes out on Thursdays, but it used to come out on Thursdays, and it was pink throughout. And I cut out all of these pink news articles, and I had comments written next to each one of them. So I went and I sat down with him, and we went over each of those articles, and I told him where I thought he could speak, answer this labor issue that was arising out of this article, answer this issue, give us a little bit more intel around why you're doing things the way you are, what are the challenges of growth such as this, and so on. And he was intrigued that I had taken such interest in the company, and he asked me why the interest. I said, well, A, I want to work for the company. B, I want to lead the HR function for this company. And C, I think I could start my own company like this at some point. So this is where the interest has come from. So that's how I got my first job. It was that intrigue, that network, building a network, professional network. My second job I got because I joined Junior Chamber International, JCI. And a good friend of mine, we created a friendship. We started to work on projects together. We started to, we would rely on each other. We would create another professional network, but this time for purposes of driving some of the agenda items that we had. And what happened is that I spoke at an event where the CEO of this company was a guest of honor. My friend then happened a few weeks later to be visiting that company and found out they were looking for a training manager. He mentioned the job to me, and I picked up the phone and called somebody who was known to me at that company, whom I had seen because I had accepted a speaking invitation at their MBA class. When she put my CV in front of the CEO, he remembered me from the speech I had made at a JCI function. So it's not a waste of time to spend your Saturday working on something that appears unrelated to your career. So again, it is important to have these connections. It is important to contribute because sometimes that contribution gives you access that you don't have. But it wasn't so much just the connection. It was that slowly I had started to build a reputation through the things that I would do, through the work that I was doing. People were confident enough to appoint me. My third role then came from, and I really shouldn't say my third role. I should say my third company, because if I say my third role, in each of these companies I've played many, many roles. But rather, what then happened is that the next company that I went to, a few years before that, I had built a reputation of being reliable. I'd been helpful when people had been repatriated from one of the companies that we had bought, and things had not gone well, so we had to bring employees back. I was in charge of the reintegration, and one of the guys that I integrated rose in the company while I had moved out, and when he heard that my company was being taken over by another, he phoned me and said, "Do you want to stay or do you want to join us?" I said, "Well, I'd like to join you." So I dropped my CV, but because I had something to do in South Africa, I got on a plane and I went to South Africa. When I was in Woolworths in Sandton, I happened to be trying to buy myself a shirt, and the CEO of this company was also in Woolies trying to buy himself a shirt. And then he says, I saw your CV on my desk on Friday. I understand you're looking for a job. I said, yes. He said, why are you looking for a job? I said, well, what happened is we had this conversation and this guy asked me if I want to stay, or if I want to come. I said, I want to come. And so that's it. I really want to come back to the company and I enjoy it. And he said, okay, fine. I don't know why I have your CV, because I don't need your CV. I know you. You have a job. When you're back in Zimbabwe at your convenience, come and then you can start working. And that's how I started working. To the extent that when I started working for this company again, I worked with no contract, no paperwork completed for a whole 2 weeks, because I knew they would still pay me. And I started getting access to company documents and working. And so again, based on reputation, relationships, that network, things were happening. But also, I started at that point to start thinking, what achievements do I want to be known for? So I stopped simply just getting work done, getting tasks done. I started to push certain achievements, big achievements that I wanted to drive. And so what I started to do was I started to lead projects. And as I led projects, people felt comfortable enough to give me bigger projects for me to run, even some that were very complicated to do. I won't be able to state which particular projects I ran at the time, because obviously I'm not authorized to speak on behalf of the company. But I ran startups for a large company, and nobody knew whether those things would work or not. Some of them failed, but some of them succeeded. Some of them failed the first time, but they succeeded the second time because there were lessons. I was willing to throw myself in and to throw my name behind those things because I wanted to be associated with achievement. My last point around this is, as I left that company in 2013, I joined another, which I work for now. And in that company, I was counting just before this call, I have worked 6 roles since December 2013. And in those 6 roles, I've looked after Zimbabwe, Malawi, a few other countries in Southern Africa, 11 of them. And then I've taken on a more senior role in South Africa, and then taken on a global role here in the UK. But I think what has started to capture my imagination over the last, say, 24 months has been something that I call game-changing skills. Because I'm starting to question whether it is enough to fill your list of qualifications with degrees. I think it's important to have a degree, but I think it's important to then add a few other things to that, and I'll get to that. So that is sort of my first point around what I'm calling strategy by formation. The second theme that I want to talk about is something that I'll call tenacity. And it came from a role that I had where things weren't working very well. And one of my bosses came and said, I know we have the right person for this project, because if there's anybody in this company who is as tenacious as you are, then that person I have never met. I know that you're tenacious, and I know that however difficult this is, you're going to focus on it and you're going to get it done. And maybe to anchor this conversation, maybe I should refer to something I like. It's a quote that I shared with Uno just the other day, by Nelson Mandela, which says, it always seems impossible until it is done. And I'll take you back to those days when I was 6 and watching, my mother's boss run a mine. This mine was Kamativi Tin Mine. Those of you who don't know the mine can Google a little bit later. Kamativi Tin Mine was a tin mine that had been started back in the days of Rhodesia, and was probably, I think, if I'm not mistaken, the only tin mine in the whole of Zimbabwe. That mine at most couldn't have had more than 5,000 inhabitants. Very tiny place, dust roads everywhere. But from that mine, I started to dream about a life that was completely unrelated to what I could see. It was based on magazines my father brought, and these were airplane magazines. Those of you who are very good friends with me will know that the way I love aviation. It started from then. I used to get lots of these magazines, and I used to try to read up on aeroplanes and designs and so on. And my love for aeroplanes made me learn a lot of places, because aeroplanes by their very nature fly to different places. So I started to love geography, which led me to love geology, which led me to love mining. And then over time, I started to love a few other things, which were unconnected, but which over time, you know, were they were so far-fetched, so far away from my reality, that there was no point in me being interested in them. To the extent that now, when I reflect on my life, I often joke to my friends that I don't know most of the people that I grew up with, because I grew up and away. I often wanted to achieve things that sounded a little bit too far-fetched, that a lot of my friends remained behind because we couldn't relate at that level. But I think the most important thing that I want to just highlight for you is, when I refer to that statement by Nelson Mandela, is imagine that you were to meet Nelson Mandela 10 years after his arrest. He's serving a lifetime sentence. He doesn't know he's going to be there for 27 years, but he's now spent 10 years. How hopeful do you think he is of his imminent release? How hopeful do you think he is of the achievement of a democratic South Africa? How hopeful do you think he is that he's going to be president? Do you think that at that point he's taking briefing notes and trying to understand, how a president operates because he thinks he's going to be president? Do you think that is his mindset? And so I'm asking this question because I want you to think of your own career, your own growth, and ask yourself, is it really possible for you to fully understand what's going to happen 10, 15, 20 years from now by trying to imagine every little bit of the future today? I want to argue that that would be a waste of time. I think it's simply important to have a principle. It's simply important to say, I want to achieve X. How you do it, when you do it, is not important. I want to achieve X. What's important is trusting the process and holding on to it. If you had asked me back in Kamativi whether I knew I would eventually leave Matabeleland and go to high school in Mashonaland, by the way, this is useless for those of you who don't understand Zimbabwe, but at the time that I grew, there was one high school in the whole province in which I lived, which means there was one school which allowed you to do advanced levels, which would enable you to become to go to university, and there was one university at the time. So all of these things about going to university, about having an international career, about living outside the world, outside my country, were all far-fetched dreams, things that did not make sense, but things that I held on to. I don't know why, but I held on to them because perhaps I believed in them. But I think the most important thing to understand is that when you hold on, there has to be a difference between blind hope and informed hope. Informed hope says, I'm doing something about it. I don't know the real connection, but I'm doing something about it. Blind hope says, I'm sitting here, I'm wishing things happen, and I'm doing absolutely nothing about it. And I think for me, this is very important to understand. I think my final point around this is, you can only be tenacious honestly and truly if you have a vision. I asked a little bit earlier when I was talking about strategy by formation. I talked about starting with why, being clear about why you are doing what you're doing, and trying to get achievements and those kinds of things. I think people know what a vision is, and people know how corporate visions are formed. So I'm not going to teach you how to do that. I think a vision is a vision. You know what a vision should be. I think what's important is to have a vision for yourself. And I try to think of my visions not in 10-year swaths. I think that's too complicated. I think of my vision on a monthly basis. I have a principle, and on a monthly basis, I try to achieve a vision for that month, which creates an insurmountable amount of pressure. I prefer that the pressure in my corporate career comes from me, and it doesn't come from outside. Because I believe sincerely that if change is happening faster than you are changing, you're falling behind. And for many, many people, I think this is what has happened. Many people are holding on to ideas about what corporate was and not what corporate is. And as a result, what they're doing is they're holding on to qualifications, they're holding on to a promotion, a promise of a promotion, they're holding on to finishing a lot of administrative tasks which don't achieve anything in particular. And they're calling that a career, they're calling that work. That can't be far from the truth. So if you're going to hope, again, I repeat, if you're going to hope, it has to be hope that is based on things that you are doing to drive that career. So tenacity is good, but blind tenacity is dangerous. My third point, which I want to talk about, is based on a quote, which again I shared with Uno just a few days ago, which says, if you don't design your own life plan, chances are you'll fall into somebody else's life plan. And guess what they may have planned for you? Nothing much. I have worked with people who say, my boss can see how hard I work, they'll promote me. In my story that I told you about my career, I told you that in most instances, I never applied for a job. And that is still true to this day. I'm often called for roles. That doesn't mean I'm special or anything like that. No. It simply means that my interactions with colleagues, with potential people who could hire me, are so clear that they understand what I can do and what I can't do. And I'm asking that you do the same. You need to be very clear in your mind what you are about. Yeah? The danger is being about everything. So design your career. Don't be this person who, when there's a job which doesn't fit into their career, they simply take it because it's going to pay more money. Sometimes you need to give up on that. In the last few years, I've given up a couple of roles because they would have made me comfortable financially, but they were not the right roles. The role I have now is one that I love and I'm passionate about, but one which I came for a particular reason into. And once that reason is achieved, that's it. I'm not supposed to sit in there simply because I enjoy the role. So here, be bold. Don't be stupid, but be bold. You know, there's a difference between a bungee jumper and a suicide jumper. They're both jumping, but the other one, to his death, the bungee jumper has made sure they are safe. Be bold. Take some leaps of faith, but faith is informed. It's not just faith because you say it. Simply because you said, I have faith, and then you're doing something. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're on the right track. So it's very dangerous, subtle differences, subtleties that are very, very important for you to point out. So just my last point on this one. I dreamt of having an international career. I dreamt of focusing at some point on my family. I dreamt of getting certain experiences, and I dreamt of making certain achievements. And as I got older and in this thing called an international career, I got sharper at clarifying for myself what those achievements were and choosing what I'm going to do with my Monday, what I'm going to do at 9 o'clock as opposed to what somebody else might want me to do. So it's simply, instead of running around making other people look good, I run around and make myself look good. And this is very, very important to me. So my last theme, which I just want to chat about very quickly, and I probably started with it, is respect the process. And there's my Instagram page is called Made by Fine Lines. And why I have that is because a few years ago, I sat and somebody was talking about the things that make us, the tiny little differences that make us. And I just want to remind Uno about a trip we had to Brussels back in 2011. where we lived in a very, very funny hotel. And in that hotel, we struggled for everything. We had just made enough money to make the trip, enough money to cover where we would stay. But what was important was that we wanted to go and attend this conference that we had traveled to attend. At that conference, I made a lot of life-changing decisions about myself. One of the things that I decided at that conference was that I was going to be about a career in business. And if Uno will recall, if he goes back to 2011, you can start to see some of the designs that came through all the career choices I made in JCI, all the career choices I made outside of JCI, which were designed to get us to that point. But I'm keen here just to make sure that it is clear how I think. So one of the first things that I do is I'm not original. I'm a serious copycat. And where I copy is I read. I read a lot. And when I read, I try to take a lesson from whatever it is that I'm reading. I think in a year, I probably go through not less than 20 books. And in the 16 years or so that I've been working, plus whatever time I was in school, I think I've read more than 300-400 books. And over time, I've started to form an opinion about certain things, but that opinion is heavily, influenced by the things that I've read and by my trials and errors as I try to implement those things. So, bit of advice from me: read, and then go and try out those things, because it's going to be very difficult to understand what you're going through if all you know is your opinion. The second thing is find other ways of learning. A seminar like this one, YouTube, but make sure you have more than one source of information. It's dangerous to believe what you hear from one person as though that was the only way to know anything. Even the people that I trust in work, my bosses, even those people, I trust them, but I still make sure I have my own opinion, which I have formed independently of them. So in summary, number one, strategy by formation. If you actually think about it, I've been talking about this through and through. Form your mind around certain things. Your mind will grow, you will change, and you'll shift. That's fine. But strategy by formation. The only way you can form a strategy is if you know why. There's a book, I think Simon Sinek, Start With Why. I'd highly recommend that. Second thing, tenacity. And again, if you go back to what I've just been talking about now, this thing about respecting the process, it comes from tenacity. But also tenacity is a strength. Resilience is a strength. Because if I talk about some of the things I've gone through, I've been shouted at by certain people in the middle of senior meetings where somebody's tried to belittle me. They have won at that moment because they were smaller in terms of their mind. They didn't think about the bigger picture. Because I don't think I'm competing for attention. I think I'm competing around principles. I'm clear who I'm about, who I am and what I'm about. I don't get into those little battles in the office. But it's very, very important that you clarify those things for yourself, because some people get angry, they go and write a resignation letter, and out the door they go. And then they make a huge mistake because they've made a permanent decision out of this temporary setback that they've had. So resilience, tenacity. Again, I spoke about designing your career. If you go back to my earlier comment around strategy by formation, this is really coming through there, that you need to continuously ask yourself, why am I working? Read it, go over and over, change it every few months, every few years, clarify it, and make sure that that vision is being lived to month on month. And then lastly, respect the process. Respect the process, because sometimes we are dying to be the next youngest, this, first black, that, first, white, this. You want the accolade before you're ready for it. There's a point that was raised by, I think it was one of my favorite authors, John Maxwell. And he says leadership is about influence, nothing more, nothing less. And in his book, where he talks about leadership. I can't remember the title now, but he talks about the power of the lead, that your leadership effectiveness always limits the kind of organization you can lead, the size of organization that you can lead. And if you think about it, your career is related to your effectiveness, your leadership effectiveness. If your level of influence, effectiveness, reliability, etc., is too low, if you get promoted to a role that requires a higher level of effectiveness and leadership, you'll soon be fired so that you can go to the right role that meets with your capabilities. So don't rush for the job, improve yourself. Because most often than not, if you're not fired, you will at least fail so that somebody else can take over. There is never a mistake about that. I've never seen an unsuccessful person sit atop of a company forever. Never. If that happens, I call them a lamppost tortoise. Because most often than not, if you find a tortoise on top of a lamppost, we know one thing for sure. It did not get itself there. It cannot stay there. And the only way it can get off is if somebody kicks it off. And it's not going to be a nice landing. So don't rush for the title. Make sure that you're ready, you're good, but don't wait forever too. It's an art. Careers are like a painting. Paint a masterpiece. Enjoy that career. Otherwise, it's a waste of time. Uno, I know I said 30 minutes. I think I've already gone over that 30 minutes. But that's what I had to share with you guys.
Wow,
And as I said, guys, sorry, I wrote this on the plane on my way here because there was no time to write slides. So I hope it was coherent enough.
No, it was. That was really amazing. I think what specifically stood out for me is when you were talking about trusting the process. And you mentioned about Mandela being in prison 10 years into being the prison and not having a bigger picture of what was going to happen 27 years down the line. And I think generally as people, we want to know what's going to happen next. We want to know the how. And I think it was really amazing how you just put that across. The question that I have for you, whilst everyone else is preparing their questions, is what has kept you grounded in your journey? Like, I mean, you mentioned about how you started off and where you are at now. What has kept you grounded?
I don't know. I don't know. I would lie that I know. I think it's been many things at different times. I think it's dangerous to try and apply rules to an ever-evolving situation in that way. And I'm being careful here because all I've been doing the last 30 minutes or so is to give you some rules. I think it's dangerous to say to yourself that I'm going to hold on to this because it's meaningful to me. It's meaningful to you today because of where you are today. As your mind expands and grows, you're going to hold on to something else. And so I think if I were to hazard an answer, I would probably say that the only thing I've held on to is the idea that I could be bigger.
Okay. That's
probably
amazing.
And I think at some point, and my sister probably held on to that longer than I did. I used to have a hashtag which I called "I'm building a great life." I left that hashtag a long time ago, but I see she's still using it. I must charge her for this. But I think at some point I also had something like, this is going to be a great story. Like as I was going through some of the toughest times of my life, I started to say to myself, this is going to be a great story. And I think it was valuable because most often than not, when you're in trouble, you don't know what's going on.
Yeah.
All you can see is trouble. And if you look for clarity at that point, I think it's a wasted effort. I think get out of the trouble first, and then figure yourself out from there. Don't try to do two things at the same time.
Wow. Thank you for that. Yeah, I mean, I think you can only connect the dots looking back. Thank you so much. I don't know if there's anybody else who has a question. I see that Melissa says she's still using it. She's still using a hashtag. Zikisa is saying that the only idea I held on to is that I could be bigger. You said you'd tell us why you chose to teach English and literature. That's a question from Tino Tinder.
Yeah, I said I used to think that it was a skill. Because growing up where I grew up, speaking a straight sentence in English was an achievement. And for the longest time, I thought I was achieving something by doing that. I think for me, the most important thing to understand is produce something. I think it is Jim Rohn who says the market pays for value. People don't pay you because you're likable, you're a nice person. People pay you because you've added value to them. They can't pay for things that they will not make a profit from.
Yeah.
So I tell people that my contribution to the companies I've worked for is that I can draw a straight line between what I've done and the money they've made. And that's not always easy for a guy who practices HR, especially when people think your entire existence is to pay salaries, which it is not.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay, we have another question from Uno. He's saying, what was the biggest challenge that you ever faced in your career?
I think the biggest challenge I ever faced in my career was stagnation. When I would go to my mentors and my sponsors and I'd say, why can't I get, big roles? And is it something that I'm not doing? Am I incapable? And they'd say, you're sharp, my friend. You're amazing. In the right time, you'll get a role. And I think these guys are lying to me. I think it killed my confidence so much that at some point I would even struggle to present, to talk. I felt like there's something that's wrong with me and people just won't tell me. I needed to know something was wrong. Why wasn't I growing? And had I known what I know now, which was that doesn't matter, I would not have held on to that question for as long as I did. I think I wasted 2 or 3 years of my life trying to find out what's wrong with me. Who cares? Lots of people have wrong things with them, but they're still leading with those faults. So it's not your faults that lead, it's your strengths. So I should have just focused on my strengths and moved on. But I think I wasn't bolder. I wasn't as bold as I am today. Today, I don't care what the next person thinks. I'm going to push what I'm about because I know what I'm about and I'm confident about it.
Wow, I love that. I think I'm going to hack in on that, especially about dealing with stagnation. Moving on to the next question, I see that we're getting a lot of questions. The next question is, how have you dealt with corporate politics, dealing with superiors, colleagues, and juniors?
So I can see that there's a colleague of mine who's joined the call, so I'm going to be very careful with my answer here. So the honest truth is that I play a different kind of politics. And this is the first time I'm admitting this in front of him. I play a different kind of politics. My politics is to say that I don't play politics.
Okay.
And how I do that is that I often appear uninterested and I often stay uninterested. And I often make sure that by staying uninterested, I insulate myself from the elements of the politics that I think are dangerous. And as the politics gets bad, I typically have 2 choices: either to wade in and take advantage of the failures of others, or to run away from the situation completely. I choose the second option as often as I can, and only the first option if I see that I have no other option. In other words, if 2 people are fighting, I'm going to stay out of the fight by going to both of them to say, I noticed that the two of you are fighting and I don't want to be part of your fight, which allows me to be neutral. But I know I'm not neutral. So the best way to handle that is simply to say to them, I'm neutral, and then to take a position that they can see is not neutral, and make sure that I'm insulated from whatever blows they might throw. So I am a political player who makes sure as much as possible that I don't come out with mud.
Wow, very strategic. Okay.
I don't think so. Survival.
The next question that we have is from Samuel. He's asking, what has been your most difficult role in your career and why would you consider that the most difficult?
I think my most difficult role was when I took over as head of HR for Southern African markets, because it was 11 countries, 11 different cultures. And that role reported into a role that reported into the HR director. And there was a lot of politics in that role because a lot of people were looking for relevance. And then there was a new culture because I was no longer working in my home country, I was working in another country. And there was a lot of backbiting. And I think for the most part, the company that I was working for was not making money. And I needed to make sure that I don't get fired. So I figured that 6 to 8 months in, I needed to make sure that I couldn't get fired. The second thing is I asked myself, what achievements could I make that would be linked to me? And I measured those achievements on a daily basis. And the third thing was that I tried as much as possible to make sure that I delivered things at twice the speed that they were expected, because I wanted it harder for anybody else to compete with me. And what that meant is that I worked at night, I worked early mornings, and most often than not, I was in 2 or 3 countries in the same week. And still achieving goals in another country. So I tried to do the impossible, because I wanted that when they were talking about the biggest talents in the business at the time, I wanted them to have me as one of the top 5 names.
Wow. Wow, that's amazing. I see Mr. Robson saying that you were his lecturer once, and that fun fact you didn't know is that you taught him international business.
I hope he's applying the principles.
Hope so too. We have Mario asking, were you ever conflicted between starting your own business or climbing up the corporate ladder? That's a very good question.
Yes, I was. In fact, at some point, I did invest in a lot of businesses. But I think early in 2019, I accepted that I'm not an entrepreneur. And what I do now is that I support people who have their own businesses as much as I can, with a real focus on real estate, because I feel like I can store value for what I've done, rather than me trying to run a business. I think my sister and I have had this conversation many times. You can't do 2 things successfully.
Wow.
You have to do one. And my fight with most of my colleagues and friends is that, what are you about? I'm about a career. At this point, that's what I'm about. And that's all I do.
Absolutely love it. I think it takes away the pressure from, we get to hear that everybody's an entrepreneur. Everybody has to be an entrepreneur. So I think this sort of takes the pressure off some of the people that feel that their field is in the corporate world. Okay, moving on. Repson says, you once said something intriguing. You said, stop this PhD mindset, make money, still hold that position. Why?
The reason I stopped him from doing a PhD was because I could see that he was focused on the idea of having a PhD instead of being successful. His definition of success was something else, and yet he was still chasing this PhD. And I answered this question with a personal situation because it doesn't apply to everyone. Rapson is an amazing writer, / author, is an amazing speaker, trainer. But here was this man parking a speaking career in order to go and do a PhD, which would do absolutely nothing for his speaking career. And I think for me, the concern is always, whatever it is you're doing, what does it do for your career? And today, I actually say to people, and I practice this myself. I often say to people, there's not a need constantly to have a huge degree if there's another way to learn the skill, particularly if the skill is small and can be learned in bite sizes. So for instance, I'm doing a nano degree in user experience design. It's 3 months long. I'm trying to learn a couple of principles. I'm not trying to become a user experience designer par excellence. I'm just trying to make sure that I can sit with them and drive certain of the things that I do, which are user experience led, with a little bit more conviction than I would have if I didn't do it. So that's my advice around this matter.
Okay. Thank you for giving him that advice, because I think if he had pursued his PhD, he was probably not going to come for the previous GSM meeting that we did. And I wasn't going to start my blog because it was through his session that I actually started my own blog. So thank you for that advice that you gave him. Let's see what's going on in the chat. Uno is asking, how have you negotiated salaries for yourself? And how have you dealt with different cultures within different countries?
There's nothing special about the way you negotiate salaries. I think so the first thing that I often say when it comes to my salary is that it is supposed to do a few things. So I go to work for my goal. So when I wake up in the morning, I say, this is my goal. So that goal has nothing to do with my job. And so if, for instance, my goal is to own 10 houses that generate X amount of rental income, then I need to be clear that my revenue, which comes from my salary, can support that dream. So I'm going to do everything in my power to make sure that that revenue does that. Now, how I get to do that is going to differ from situation to situation. Some situations I'll leverage relationships. Sometimes I'll leverage my knowledge of process. Sometimes I'll leverage my understanding of what the company wants to achieve. But it'll be difficult to say there's one way to do it. I think the most dangerous thing is not to negotiate. Maybe that's the best way to look at that. When it comes to cultures, I think the first thing to understand is that everybody wants to be understood. One of the things that I do is when I move to a country is I try to make friends from that country. So when I lived in Cape Town for 2 years, I only saw Uno once. He hates me for it. But I knew him and I didn't want to know him anymore. what I wanted to know was what the South Africans think like, and that's what I spent my time doing. I spent my time being friends with people from South Africa, from Cape Town, because those were the people that I worked with, and those were the people who I didn't know. So I spent a lot of time doing that. I was a bad friend to Uno, but I covered for it by speaking at his symposium.
I'm sure you're being forgiven. On that note, I'm going to hand over to you, Uno.
Thank you very much, Francis, for the time that you've spent with us. I really appreciate every bit that you have taught us today. And I could listen to you for another hour and just still keep asking questions, because I believe your rules are not written, but in that head. Yeah, the seats strategy, 107 in that head, and I know that. So I usually want to, if I spend time with Francis, could be an hour. I think I probably talk for 2 minutes. The rest, if I'm talking to him, I'm asking him questions, because the way he has grown in his career and the way he understands the world is fascinating to me. And I'm so happy that he has agreed to come onto this platform and share some of that, which I believe is a small percentage of what we could get in another hour. So I really, really thank you for coming through. I'm sure there are many people here who have learned a lot from what you have said. If you don't know Francis' career options are quite many. If he starts speaking to you in the voice of President Robert Mugabe right now, you will die. I kid you not. If he starts dancing, you wouldn't believe that he's got this career of such a corporate leader. But he has chosen a path that he has excelled in, and I enjoy being friends with him. So Franco, thanks a lot for sharing this platform with us.